At Maple Street Grill, 76-year-old veteran Elijah Turner faces humiliation when a new cashier, Nikki, rejects his faded veteran ID, dismissing him as a fraud. The breakfast crowd stays silent as Elijah quietly leaves, dignity intact. But waiter Marcus, recognizing Elijah's service, calls his uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Rhodess. Minutes later, Rhodess arrives with Elijah's military records, revealing a heroic past. As the restaurant falls silent, Elijah's honor is restored, but questions linger. Why did no one speak up sooner? What secrets does Elijah's past hold? The truth promises to reshape the town's perspective forever. Your support keeps their stories alive, reminding us that decency and respect transform lives. Join our community, share your own experiences, and help preserve the legacy of courage. Click subscribe now because honor deserves to be remembered. The morning light poured into Maple Street Grill, bathing the cozy diner in a golden hue. The place buzzed with the familiar rhythm of a Wednesday breakfast rush, forks clinking against plates, voices weaving a tapestry of small talk, and the occasional jingle of the bell above the door. The crowd was a snapshot of middle-class life, business types skimming emails over their omelets, retirees nursing their coffees with leisurely sips, and parents nudging their kids to hurry up before the school bus arrived. Into this lively scene stepped Elijah Turner, a man whose quiet presence seemed to soften the edges of the room. At 76, his once mighty frame had gentled with time, his shoulders slightly rounded, his stride deliberate. His dark skin, etched with lines from years under scorching suns and through unrelenting trials, told a story of resilience. A subtle tremor in his left hand, a keepsake from a war most in the room knew only from textbooks, betrayed the weight of his past. Crowning his head was a faded Marine Corps cap, its emblem worn but proud, a testament to a life of service. For 3 years, Elijah had made his pilgrimage to Maple Street every Wednesday. The diner's 30% veterans discount was a lifeline, stretching his meager government aid to cover a simple indulgence, an egg sandwich and a cup of black coffee. It wasn't just about the meal, it was about dignity, about carving out a moment where he could sit among others and feel, if only briefly, like he belonged. The staff knew him well. Some called him by name, others simply recognized the Marine who comes on Wednesdays. He spoke little, but his gratitude shone through in the warm, quiet, "Oi, thank you," he offered each time. That morning, though, a stranger stood at the register. Nikki, barely out of her teens, her platinum blonde hair catching the light, was lost in her phone, her acrylic nails tapping out a rhythm as she curated her TikTok feed. To her, the customers were background noise, their stories irrelevant to her digital world. Elijah approached, his heart steady despite the tremor in his fingers as he reached for his wallet. "Good morning," and he said, his voice deep and kind, carrying the cadence of a man who'd learned to speak softly in a loud world. "1 egg sandwich and coffee, please. I have the Veterans Discount Card." With reverence, he presented a laminated Veterans Affairs ID, its edges softened by years of careful handling, its print faded but clear. It was more than a card. It was a fragment of his identity, a hard-won proof of sacrifice. Nikki's eyes flicked to it for a heartbeat before settling back on Elijah, her mouth twisting into a skeptical smirk. "I need a real ID," she announced, her voice cutting through the diner's hum. "Not something printed off like this. People try to fake these all the time for the discount." Her words were a blade, sharp and unthinking, slicing through the air. Elijah's face held steady, but beneath his calm exterior, a quiet ache stirred. He'd faced skepticism before, too many times to count, but each instance stung anew, a reminder of a world that often saw him as less than his truth. Without a word, he reached beneath his shirt, drawing out a pair of dog tags. The tarnished silver caught the light, the chain leaving a faint groove in his neck, a mark worn from years of service in Vietnam in 1969. He held them out, not with defiance but with hope, a silent testament to his honor. Nikki's shrug was as dismissive as her tone. "Anyone can buy those online now," she said, her words tossing his sacrifice aside like a trinket from a website. Behind Elijah, the line shifted impatiently. A man muttered, "Come on, man, some of us have jobs to get to." A woman's whisper followed, "These scammers get more creative every day." Each comment landed like a stone, piling onto the weight Elijah carried. He stood there, the air thick with judgment, his heart a quiet battlefield. He could feel their gazes or their absence as eyes slid away, refusing to meet his. The diner, once a haven, now felt like a courtroom where he stood trial for existing. With a single nod, barely perceptible, Elijah tucked the dog tags back against his chest, slid the ID into his wallet, and turned toward the door. His steps were slow, each one a deliberate act of composure, though inside a familiar pain bloomed, a mix of resignation and defiance, the kind that comes from proving yourself again and again to a world that refuses to listen. As he passed the tables, no one looked up. No one spoke. The diner's rhythm resumed, as if he'd never been there. The bell chimed as the door closed, and Elijah was gone, his eyes tracing the floor, his soul bruised but unbroken. In the corner, though, Marcus O'Neill had seen it all. At 24, Marcus had a gift for noticing what others overlooked. His warm brown eyes had followed Elijah's quiet ritual many times over his 2 years at Maple Street Grill. To most, Elijah was just a regular, but Marcus had once paused to listen when Elijah let slip a name, Kesan, that echoed in his uncle's military tales. Watching Nikki's dismissal, Marcus felt a fire kindle in his chest. He saw the subtle sag in Elijah's shoulders, the faint tremble in his hand as he hit his dog tags. It wasn't just a denied discount, it was a denial of a man's life, his truth, his courage. Marcus slipped into the break room, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Uncle Dan," he said, his voice taut with purpose. "It's Marcus. Quick question. Do you know an Elijah Turner?" "Marine, Vietnam era." The line went quiet, a pause heavy with memory. Then a voice thick with reverence replied, "Elijah Turner from the 9th Marine? Of course I know him. He pulled your father out of artillery fire at Kesan. Why are you asking?" Marcus's heart raced, his resolve hardening. This was bigger than a meal. It was about justice, about righting a wrong. 5 minutes later, the bell chimed again, and the diner hushed. A major in crisp uniform strode in, his presence a thunderclap in the cozy space. A thick file folder was tucked under his arm, its contents a mystery that drew every eye. His polished shoes echoed with authority, his gaze sweeping the room with intent. Whispers stirred. Why would a man like Elijah, a quiet figure in a worn cap, summon the military itself? What story lay within that folder, and what did it reveal about the man who had left in silence? Elijah Turner sat on a splintered bench outside the diner, his shoulders bowed under the weight of decades, his calloused hands cradling dog tags that gleamed faintly in the morning sun. The engravings, his name, service number, blood type, were worn but legible, relics of a time when they were his only tether to identity in the chaos of Vietnam. Now they were deemed unworthy of a breakfast discount, a rejection that cut deeper than any battlefield wound. His eyes, heavy with the ghosts of fallen brothers, gazed into a horizon where memories of gunfire and camaraderie lingered, untouched by the indifference of the world around him. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his stillness was a quiet act of defiance, a refusal to let his worth be erased. Inside, the restaurant thrummed with life. Nikki, a cashier with a sharp tongue and a brighter smile, leaned against the counter, her thumb flicking through her phone as she laughed with a coworker. "Some old guy tried to use this ancient card for a veteran's discount," she said, her tone breezy but dismissive. "Like, get a proper ID if you want a deal, you know?" She didn't see Elijah's hunched figure beyond the window, didn't sense the weight of his sacrifice or the pride in his silence. Her words hung in the air, light but barbed, wounding without intent. Marcus, a server with the quiet intensity, wove through the tables, pouring coffee and clearing plates. But his eyes kept straying to Elijah. Guilt gnawed at him, a knot in his chest that tightened with every glance. He'd watched the exchange at the counter, seen the flicker of hurt in Elijah's face when Nikki turned him away, and though he'd wanted to intervene, the morning rush had pulled him back into its current. Now, as he saw Elijah's unmoving form, he felt a surge of shame, as though he'd betrayed a sacred trust. In a stolen moment, he ducked into the back, his voice hushed as he called his uncle. "He's just sitting there, Uncle Dan. They wouldn't take his ID, it's not right." On the other end, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Rhodess gripped the phone, his jaw clenched with a fury he kept tightly leashed. "Don't let him leave if you can help it," he said, his voice taut with purpose. Then after a beat, he relented. "No, don't interfere. Let this play out. I'm 15 minutes out." And he was already moving, his mind locked on Elijah, a man whose courage had shaped his own. In the restaurant, the morning unfolded in blissful ignorance. A young couple giggled over their avocado toast, tilting plates for the perfect photo, their world a bubble of carefree joy. Businessmen at a nearby table traded loud predictions about quarterly gains, their voices brash and unyielding. A mother chided her kids for tossing bits of pancake, her tone a blend of love and frustration. Outside, Elijah remained unseen, his presence as faint as the faded ink on his tags. A man whose life of service was forgotten by those he'd fought for. 4 minutes later, a deep rumble shattered the morning's rhythm, drawing eyes to the street. A black military SUV with government plates pulled up, defying the no parking sign with quiet audacity. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Rhodess stepped out, his uniform a tapestry of ribbons that told of wars fought and lives saved. At 52, he carried himself with the unyielding focus of a man on a mission, his dark eyes fixed on the diner's entrance. Diners paused, forks hovering, as whispers spread like wildfire. Rhodess didn't falter, his stride cutting through the morning haze like a blade. Marcus, mid-task, caught sight of his uncle and felt a rush of relief laced with reverence. "Uncle Dan," he murmured as Rhodess passed, a leather portfolio bearing military insignia in his grip. The restaurant hushed, the clatter of plates fading as eyes tracked the officer's path. The air thrummed with unspoken questions, a sense that something momentous was unfolding. Rhodess reached the counter with the precision of a soldier storming a stronghold. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but commanding, parting the line without resistance. His knuckles rapped the counter, a sharp sound that drew every eye. Nikki looked up, her confidence wilting under his gaze. "Who denied service to Elijah Turner just now?" he asked, his tone even but resonant, filling the silent room. Nikki's heart stuttered, her fingers stilling on her phone. I don't know who you're talking about," she said, her voice faltering. Rhodess didn't waver. The elderly black gentleman. Marine Corps cap, dog tags, veteran ID card. 5 minutes ago. The room's attention shifted to Nikki, who squirmed under the scrutiny. "I didn't deny him service," she insisted, her words tumbling out. "I just couldn't accept that ID. It's policy." Rhodess opened his portfolio, breaking the government seal with deliberate care. He laid out documents with a reverence that silenced the room. "Combat Action Ribbon, 1969, he said, placing the certificate down. "Bronze Star with Valor, Battle of Khe Sanh." Another document followed. "Honorable Discharge, 1972. Each word was a hammer, each paper a monument to Elijah's sacrifice, demanding respect long overdue. The diner stood still, the weight of a hero's life laid bare, a call to honor that could not be ignored. In the year 1972, a cascade of documents spilled across the counter, each one heavy with the weight of history. There were citations, commendations from the 9th Marine Regiment, and at the heart of it all, a faded black and white image of a young Elijah Turner, standing tall in his crisp Marine uniform alongside his unit. The photograph captured a moment of pride frozen in time, a stark contrast to the scene that had just unfolded. Earlier that day, Elijah, now an elderly man with weathered hands and a quiet demeanor, had been publicly slighted, his dignity bruised by assumptions rooted in his age and unassuming appearance. The sting of that moment lingered in the air, sharp and undeniable. Nikki, the young woman behind the counter, felt the blood drain from her face as the gravity of her actions settled over her. Her heart raced, a mix of defensiveness and dawning shame churning within her. "I was just following procedure," she stammered, her voice thin and unsteady. She had been trained to enforce rules, to maintain order, but no one had prepared her for the human cost of her words. Across from her, Rhodess, a man whose calm authority seemed to anchor the room, fixed her with a measured gaze. "No one's questioning your adherence to procedure," he said, his tone steady but firm, "but procedures don't demand discourtesy. They don't call for humiliation." His words landed like a quiet rebuke, not just for Nikki, but for everyone who had stood by and watched. The restaurant, once alive with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, had fallen into an eerie stillness. Even the kitchen, usually a symphony of sizzling pans and shouted orders, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, Marcus, a server with a kind heart and a keen sense of justice, had slipped away moments earlier to fetch Elijah, who had stepped out to gather himself after the ordeal. Now, Marcus guided the elderly Marine back inside, his hand gentle on Elijah's arm. Elijah entered with hesitation, his brow furrowed in confusion at the unnatural silence that greeted him. His eyes, sharp despite his years, scanned the room, landing on the counter where his military records lay spread out like an offering. The sight stirred something deep within him, memories of battles fought, promises made, and a younger self who had believed in honor above all else. When Rhodes caught sight of Elijah, his posture shifted in an instant. He straightened, his shoulders squared, and with the precision of a man who had never forgotten his own service, he rendered a crisp military salute. "Sergeant Turner," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "it's long overdue that this town acknowledges what it owes you." The words were not just a statement, but a vow, heavy with the weight of unspoken apologies. Elijah, caught off guard, felt a flicker of instinct from decades past. His body responded before his mind could catch up, returning the salute with a precision that belied his age. The motion was fluid, a muscle memory etched into his bones from a lifetime of discipline. For a moment, he was not the old man in a worn jacket, but the young Marine who had stood unwavering in the face of chaos. The door swung open again, admitting 3 uniformed service members, their presence commanding immediate attention. They carried a framed certificate adorned with the county's Veterans Honor Roll emblem, its gold lettering gleaming under the restaurant's fluorescent lights. Without a word, they moved with purpose, mounting the frame on the wall directly beneath the menu board, a place of prominence where no one could ignore it. Rhodes turned to address the room, his voice steady but resonant. "From this day forward, this establishment will display Sergeant Elijah Turner's name among those who served our nation with distinction." The declaration hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. One by one, the patrons rose to their feet, the scrape of chairs against the linoleum floor the only sound in the room. No one spoke. Some couldn't bring themselves to meet Elijah's gaze, their faces shadowed with shame for their earlier silence. Others offered tentative nods, a belated acknowledgement of the man they had seen humiliated just minutes before. Nikki, meanwhile, had retreated from the counter, her earlier confidence shattered under the weight of the room's collective judgment. She stood near the back, her arms crossed tightly, as if to shield herself from the truth of what had happened. Inside, she grappled with a storm of emotions, regret, embarrassment, and a nagging sense that she had failed not just Elijah but herself. An older woman, her hands trembling slightly, approached Elijah with hesitant steps. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have said something." Her eyes, misty with unshed tears, held a plea for forgiveness. A man in a business suit, his tie suddenly feeling like a noose, stepped forward next. "We all should have," he added, loosening the knot at his throat as if to free himself from the weight of his inaction. He had watched the scene unfold, safe in his anonymity, and now the guilt gnawed at him. Elijah stood at the center of it all, his expression a mask of quiet dignity. He studied the room. These strangers who had witnessed his humiliation in silence, and now stood to honor his vindication with equal speechlessness. His heart was a tangle of emotions, the ache of the morning's disrespect, the unexpected warmth of this recognition, and a deep, unshakable resolve to remain true to himself. He felt neither anger nor triumph, only a weary acceptance of the world's contradictions. "I didn't come here for recognition," he said at last, his voice low but steady, the first full sentence he had spoken since entering. "Just breakfast and respect, one I can live without." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of standing tall in the face of adversity. The manager, who had been absent during the confrontation, emerged from the back office, his tie askew as he hurried to make amends. "Sir," he said, his voice overly earnest, "your meal is on the house today and every Wednesday from now on." He hoped the gesture would smooth over the incident, but Elijah shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want charity," he said firmly, "just the discount I earned." His words were a quiet assertion of his worth, a reminder that he sought no more and no less than what was rightfully his. Rhodes placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, the gesture both grounding and respectful. "It's not charity to honor commitments, Sergeant," he said softly. "This country promised to remember your service. Today we're simply keeping that promise." His words were a bridge between past and present, a reminder that some debts could still be paid, even if belatedly. In the weeks that followed, what locals came to call the Wednesday incident left an indelible mark on the restaurant and its patrons. Elijah's routine remained unchanged. He still arrived every Wednesday for breakfast, still ordered the same modest meal, still spoke little, but the atmosphere around him had transformed. Marcus, with the manager's blessing, had officially renamed breakfast combo number 3 the Turner Special, a small but meaningful tribute that brought a faint smile to Elijah's lips each time he heard it. Regular customers made a point of offering respectful nods when he entered, their gestures carrying a quiet apology for the past. Some veterans, drawn by the story that had spread through the town, chose to sit near him, their conversations low and private, a shared language of service that needed no explanation. Nikki, meanwhile, had been transferred to another branch across town, her departure swift and quiet. Before leaving, she had left a handwritten note for Elijah, her words clumsy but sincere, an attempt to make amends for the pain she had caused. Elijah read it once, his expression unreadable, then folded it carefully and tucked it away. He didn't speak of it, but the gesture lingered in his thoughts, a small spark of hope that people could change. For Elijah, the framed certificate on the wall was less about recognition and more about a promise kept, not just to him, but to all who had served. Each Wednesday, as he sipped his coffee and ate his meal, he felt the weight of the past and the quiet strength of the present, intertwined in a way that made him feel, if only for a moment, that he was truly seen. At the heart of Elijah's modest home, a worn Bible rested on a simple wooden table, its pages holding more than scripture. Tucked carefully between them was a small, faded item, a keepsake of his past, perhaps a letter or a photograph, though no one ever asked him to reveal its secrets. It was a private anchor, a quiet reminder of a life shaped by battles both visible and unseen. When Marcus, a young man with a kind heart and curious eyes, asked Elijah if he had truly forgiven the woman who had once dismissed him, Elijah paused, his weathered face softening with thought. His voice, steady but tinged with the weight of years, carried a wisdom honed by hardship. "Forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it," he said, his gaze drifting somewhere distant, as if seeing the jungles of Vietnam or the faces of those who had wronged him. "It's about freeing yourself from a burden you don't need to carry. Life's too heavy already to hold on to grudges." Those words lingered in Marcus's mind, stirring a quiet awe for the man who had endured so much yet chose grace over bitterness. Colonel Rhodess, a man whose presence commanded respect even without his uniform, visited Elijah from time to time, not as a superior officer but as a friend who understood the unspoken costs of war. On one such visit, he brought with him a stack of historical records, meticulously compiled and yellowed with age. These documents told a story few had bothered to uncover. Elijah's unit, often overlooked by military historians, had held a vital position during one of Vietnam's bloodiest battles. The details painted a vivid picture, soldiers entrenched in mud and chaos, holding the line against overwhelming odds, their courage a flicker of light in the darkness of war. Rhodess's voice was heavy with reverence as he shared the account, his eyes searching Elijah's for a reaction. "Why didn't you ever speak up?" he asked, leaning forward, his brow furrowed with a mix of admiration and frustration. "When people dismissed your service, why didn't you set them straight?" Elijah's hands, calloused from years of labor and war, folded slowly in his lap. He considered the question with the same care he gave to every decision, his silence filled with the weight of memory. "In war," he finally said, "I learned that explaining yourself to someone who's already made up their mind is like shouting into the wind. It doesn't change a thing. But actions speak when words fall short." His words were simple, yet they carried the depth of a man who had long ago stopped seeking validation from a world that often looked away. A month later, Elijah's heart, weakened by the lingering poison of Agent Orange from his service decades ago, gave out in the quiet of his sleep. His passing was peaceful, a gentle departure from a life that had known too much turmoil. The community expected a small funeral, perhaps a handful of mourners for a man who lived so quietly. But the church overflowed with hundreds, neighbors, shopkeepers, strangers who had never exchanged a word with Elijah but felt compelled to honor him. They came, stirred by a collective guilt, a need to right the wrong of overlooking a man whose dignity had shone through his silence. At the podium, Colonel Rhodess stood tall, his voice steady but thick with emotion as he read from a handwritten page found among Elijah's belongings. The words were Elijah's own, scrawled in careful, deliberate handwriting. "If I am remembered, let it not be for the battles I fought with weapons, but for the dignity I tried to carry when the war followed me home in ways no one could see. If my life means anything, let it show that being truly seen by even one person can restore faith in humanity." Marcus saw me when others turned away. Sometimes that's all the honor a soldier needs. The room fell silent, each word settling like a stone in the hearts of those gathered, a testament to a man who had fought not just for his country, but for his own quiet sense of grace. In the wake of Elijah's passing, the Maple Street Grill became a beacon of change. Inspired by his story, the diner established a veterans breakfast program, offering free meals to any former service member in need, no questions asked, no proof required. The staff underwent training, not just to recognize military IDs, but to treat every person who walked through the door with the respect they deserved, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Marcus, now a leader among the staff, made sure Elijah's memory lived on. He pinned a photograph of the old veteran to the staff bulletin board, a simple image capturing Elijah's quiet strength. Beneath it, he wrote a caption that became a mantra for the diner. "Before you judge someone, remember their greatest battles may have been fought long before you met them." Those words echoed in the hearts of the staff, a reminder to look beyond the surface, to see the stories etched in every worn face. Elijah's life had been one of quiet endurance. He never raised his voice when disrespected, never demanded recognition for the sacrifices he'd made. Instead, he walked away with the same steady grace he'd carried through countless battlefields, his heart unburdened by the need for applause. Yet someone, Marcus, had seen him, had spoken up when others stayed silent. That single act of recognition had rippled outward, transforming an entire room, an entire community. Perhaps true honor, Marcus realized, wasn't found in laminated IDs or polished medals. It lived in the memories we choose to preserve, in the respect we offer not because it's easy, but because it's right. In a world to judge based on appearances, age, status, or the wear of years, Elijah's story was a reminder that behind every quiet stranger might lie a tale of courage so profound it could humble anyone willing to listen. His veteran's ID, worn and faded, could never capture the full measure of his sacrifice. But the way a community responded to it revealed what they still understood about honor, a truth that lived not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, steadfast choice to see and remember.